started. I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. This is an informational meeting being conducted by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ for short. My name is Brad Patterson. I work at the TCEQ in the office of the Chief Clerk. I'm the moderator for tonight's meeting. My role here tonight is just to keep the meeting moving in an orderly fashion so that we can give as many people an opportunity to speak tonight that wish to do so. Just for the record, this is a meeting on an authorization for Sand Mining of Texas, LLC, and the authorization number is 144604.
We really appreciate these folks. Look at this turnout of people from TCEQ. And it wouldn't have happened without Representative Guillen's office. So I want to tell you that Representative Guillen can't be here tonight. If you know much about the way the legislature operates, they're crushed right now. They got about 2.5 days before they finish their legislative session, and they actually start working now. They're working almost 24 hours a day now, trying to finish their session up. But his chief of staff's on his way. He's running a little late. He's about at mile marker, probably about 1:13 about now. I just talked to him. But Robert McVeigh will be here, and he's his chief of staff. TCEQ does not normally do these types of meetings. They're only doing it because Representative Guillen asked. And I mean, they deserve credit for taking time out of a very busy schedule, and they don't have time to do these sort of things all over the state. But we got it because of Representative Guillen's clout as a state representative. And we do appreciate them being here. And we want to give them all the respect we can. But this is for you. This is for you to ask questions. And that's the whole purpose of it. So you could be here and ask all the questions you want. Now, Brad will handle the questions, but I just need to warn you in advance, if it's about the company or it's about the state or policy outside of environmental issues, he's probably going to refer you to somebody else. So I think they're going to focus on environmental issues pretty much. But beyond that, this is your meeting, so ask your questions, and I hope you get what you came for tonight.
So at this time, they're authorized under 3 different permit by rules. They are for wet sand mining. They're commonly seen for wet sand mining, the mining of the sand, and then the drying of the sand, and then the stockpiling of that sand after it's been dried. So I think that's a brief overview of the air permitting portion and what authorization is going on.
So here during the question and answer period, we're going to be looking for questions that you have related to TCEQ's jurisdiction on these types of operations. So when you hear me call your name, come on up, and I would ask you to really think about what your most pressing questions are, so that we can, like I said, just give everyone an opportunity to speak. I'm going to call you up, hopefully in the order in which you signed in tonight. I may call several names at one time just so that you can be prepared and getting ready to come on up.
Well, my biggest question is we're over a recharge zone, and your permitting is allowed a concentration of 5 different companies in one area taking the filter off of our recharge zone. Each one of these companies is going to be probably doing the max they possibly can under your regulations. And when all 5 of these are operational, they're going to exceed the air quality limits. What are you going to do about it? What is the recourse that y'all will place on these companies?
Okay.
So with regards to the air authorizations and the air emission limits, as you mentioned, these facilities, if they're authorized under permit by rule, they do have limitations on them. Those limitations are a permitting mechanism, and they would evaluate the air quality through different parts of the permitting process for a larger facility.
But y'all have permitted 5 different companies in less than a 3-mile area. You're concentrating, each one of these companies is going to exceed just by the accumulation of 5 different companies. So what recourse what will you do?
Again, during the permitting process?
No, this is during the operation process.
In the operation process.
I'm sorry?
They're going to exceed the limits that y'all place on them.
Is that a cumulative effects question, or
Yes.
what do we? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just preparing the staff.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Find out who is best to address it.
My name is Booker Harris. I'm the Senior Attorney for Air Quality. As Sam has discussed, the way that the statute is set up is that the Commission has the authority to create authorizations if a particular plant operation won't contribute significantly to the atmosphere. So, and there are general requirements that apply to every permit by rule, and then for the specific PBR, there are specific requirements that they have to comply with. Now, part of the general requirements is that they have to keep records, and in some respects conduct some visual inspections, perhaps some opacity reviews, and because of the way that the statute is set up with the insignificant contribution, as long as they can document that they're in compliance with their PBR, a cumulative effect that would violate any sort of ambient air quality standard is not expected. And so as far as what you're talking about from an operational standpoint going forward, that is an Office of Compliance and Enforcement side, that if there's something that they're failing to do to be in compliance with their permit by rule, then, and the regional office can document it, and I don't want to speak for Joel, then depending on what it is, will dictate the course of any potential notice of violation or enforcement action going down the road. So that's how my understanding of that operational stance going forward is set up.
So what agency protects us on an accumulative, when they exceed cumulatively all these companies, what agency will protect us if we have a complaint?
Well, the TCEQ is responsible under the Clean Air Act for any emissions of air contaminants to the atmosphere.
Okay.
And like I said, the expectation is that even having multiple sources in an area, that the emission levels are set.
You don't think it will?
Well, I can't predict that, but the expectation is that it isn't, and then it becomes, if we document, have a complaint and document, then that would bring the enforcement process into the picture.
Yeah, let's let Joel, he's from the regional office, address
Hi,
that.
my name is Joel Anderson, and I'm with the San Antonio region. So we're located up the road at I-35 in Judson. And so we're field operations, and our job is to inspect these facilities and to handle complaints. And we're going to make sure that 100% of the complaints that we receive are investigated. So if you feel that there's a nuisance condition, give us a call and we'll come down and conduct an investigation. If you feel that the facility is somehow operating not in compliance with their permit or the rules and regs, give us a call and we'll come down and conduct that investigation.
Yeah. No, I was more worried about the cumulative, just like the reduction in the filter for our aquifer.
And that's what I think Booker was saying, is that is not expected.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Step back up to the microphone if you don't mind.
This is noted as a FEMA flood area. Chapter 334 of your responsibilities, I'm just going to briefly go over it. The purpose of this subchapter F is to provide a regulatory program for above-ground storage tanks storing petroleum products as prescribed in the Texas Water Code, Chapter 26, Subchapter I, to maintain and protect the quality of groundwater and surface water resources in the state from certain substances in above-ground storage tanks that may pollute such groundwater and surface water resources, and to provide for the protection of human health and safety, as well as the protection of the overall environment of the state. A March 24th letter to Judge Robert Hurley here from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, Mr. Richard Hyde. Judge Hurley's questions: we would like to know what chemicals they are adding in their process and what this will do to air quality, groundwater impact, and downstream impact. The answer: sand mining of Texas represented that no flocculants coatings, chemicals, or other additives, collectively chemicals, would be used on site at this time. Consequently, the permit does not authorize the use of chemicals. As a director of the Evergreen, I have to take that as, that's a statement of fact. We can't really look for anything to monitor water quality if we don't know what's going to be put in there. They're saying nothing. But I will submit that there will be fuel storage on that site. And the containment of that fuel in a flood, and you can all see this is a flood-prone area, could be a very serious question. So my question to you is, can you assure the citizens of Atascosa County that you will enforce Chapter 334 on this new plan?
Joel?
Well, so I think are you speaking specifically to the guidance in the floodplain?
I'm specifically, yes.
So what we would do, we have spill rules and we have what we call AST rules. So yes, if there were a release from an AST, we would, above ground storage tank or PST, petroleum storage tank, we would ensure that it was addressed appropriately.
Prior to it flooding, what are you going to do? I don't care about once it's in the water or in the creek, Galvan Creek, or in the top of the recharge zone, we can't do anything about it. So what are you going to do prior to that to prevent it?
Well, they will have to have a registration, and depending upon the size of the tank, there'll be varying levels of protection, secondary containment, and things like that to address.
You will ensure that in the upfront design.
We'll ensure that they follow whatever regulations are applicable, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. And then Oscar will be followed by Jessica Hardy.
My question is, whenever these permits come to you all, are you all aware, or when these permits came to you all, were you all aware that this project or plant was going to be over a recharge zone?
Is there anybody that can address that? Okay, go ahead.
For the air permitting side, they do provide the location of the facility. They have to provide the county and the location. However, for air permitting purposes, we do not look at the facility location in terms of recharge
It
zone.
really makes no difference, but on the water side, it does. And so in permitting and putting any kinds of rules or regulations on these facilities, to me, you need to know that it's over recharge zone, because the recharge zones are much more fragile than normal land, what I consider normal land. Recharge zones are taking in the water that we drink. Example of Edwards recharge zones. Edwards aquifer recharge rapidly. The water percolates through cracks and canyons or crevices, it goes in quickly. Our recharge zone does not recharge as rapidly, but it still recharges, and anything that goes into the ground undetected is going to end up in that aquifer. What kind of security do we have that there will be no contamination to the aquifer? Normally you get complaints from somebody and it's stormwater runoff or something that has left the premises of a plant, and somebody calls in and you go investigate. But if it's on the property and it's not reported, it's going to go into the soil. And once, and we had a meeting with Preferred Sand, and I asked them, the topographic level of the land at this, right now, presently, when you get finished with your project, what level will the land be? And they told me 90 feet lower. There is a Galvan Creek. That whole area is a watershed for Galvan Creek. So water tends to flow downhill. They said they're not going to mess with the natural channel of the Galvan. But how do we know where the natural channel is? It may have been someplace else. It may be in an area that they're going to excavate 100 years ago. And so what's to keep that creek from going to the lower portion of the land later on? What's going to keep chemicals, who's going to detect these chemicals if they use chemicals, fuel, anything else that it's got into the soil? Are you going to rely on them to report it? What type of, are there going to be regulations put in place to make sure that their structures have plenty of securities, or that they're designed to have multiple guards to prevent any spills from reaching the recharge zone?
No.
It's a whole new field. Edwards has large municipalities protecting it. Our recharge zone, we don't have, our aquifer does not have the large number of people to speak up for it. And that's what we're doing here, is we're speaking up for our aquifer.
Sure, I appreciate that. We may have to circle back around to address that.
Okay,
here in a little
so
bit.
there is, at this time, there is no safeguards in place for plants over recharge zones. Recharge zones are, at this point, are considered like any other land. There's no special regulations for recharge zones. Is that my understanding?
I see nodding heads. Just go ahead and pick up a microphone.
I would say outside of the Edwards, and I'm looking at Mike, that would be a safe statement.
That there are no safeguards for?
Well, you have the general rules and regulations. You have spill prevention and control. You have the spill rules and regs, petroleum storage tank regulations, wastewater pond regulations. You have a whole set of regulations.
But none of them are directed specifically for areas that fall within recharge zones.
Outside of the Edwards,
Right.
I don't believe I can speak to any others.
Okay.
With regards to rules protecting aquifers, Joel's right that the Edwards is the only aquifer that it has special rules, and I believe there's John Graves Scenic Waterway in New Dallas also has.
Large municipality, yes.
There is, short of having your state rep, file a bill with the state legislature about providing extra protection for the Carrizo Springs, or recharge zones of all state aquifers, that would be one avenue. There is also the possibility of filing a petition for rulemaking with the agency to look into providing more protection, but we would be very limited without a legislative bill behind the rule petition. But currently, there's no protection outside of our rules that do protect. In the case of petroleum storage tanks, above ground storage tanks, and all the different regulations of the TCEQ that are meant to protect the environment, human health, wildlife, and the state's natural resources. So, but basically, I would, state rep would be the person to talk to.
So you all do not have the authority to put in the permits that say settling ponds or need to be double lined and monitored for leakage, or that fuel tanks need to have double spill containment and monitored, and or that there cannot be any hazardous chemicals used within this facility because of its location being over a recharge zone. You do not have the authority to do that unless it's put into law by the legislature.
Well, we're limited to what our rules allow us to
Right, so
do,
right now,
and those are usually based off of legislation.
So my question, I guess, at this point, you do not have any rules at your disposal to do anything of that nature?
To add extra protection for recharge zone?
Because it falls in a recharge zone, yes.
I may not be correct, but I don't believe so currently. That we're
So we're kind of
Those are, but again, there are other measures in place like.
Right, and we are pursuing those, but those all take time, and it only takes one spill, and once it's in the aquifer or in the recharge zone, what are the possibilities of being able to clean it up, and the expense, and who's going to detect it? Till it's detected, it may be too late.
Thank you.
For this type of permit right now that we have for this facility, we go with what the permit requirements are, and we're limited with certain things. But if a facility in this area or any area does have an individual permit, then the level of review is different, and depending on where it's at, sometimes groundwater will do a review to determine if there's need additional protection or different water quality standards that may need to be considered. So for individual permits, the review is slightly different than a general permit or a PBR.
All right.
Introduce Robert McVeigh. He's Chief of Staff for Representative Guillen's office, who made these arrangements for us. And we have an outstanding relationship, I feel, with his office, and they're always there for us, and we really appreciate him.
As they said, I'm Robert McVeigh. I've been Representative Guillen's Chief of Staff for about 15 years. We've been monitoring this very closely ever since we were first contacted back in January. Unfortunately, with the timing this year, the legislature and the time to file bills passed very, very quickly. However, we are monitoring it. We are picking up more information constantly. We've been in contact with Russell and others here who have been very, very involved in all of this. And very pleased to have been able to bring the TCEQ tonight. They're the ones that keep track of this stuff all over the state. It may be, and indeed the representative feels that it is true that there aren't enough protections right now for this kind of thing. We've never seen this come up before. But we're hopeful that in the future we can make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Hi, my name's Jessica Hardy, but you guys might know me as Receptor. I'm one of the circles on y'all's map. I live right outside where the mine's gonna be. My first question, if these mines are safe enough to be put into a neighborhood, then why are there limits set on how close we have to be for away from the emissions?
The distance that is set is to make it protective of human health. So the particulate matter, the dust that comes up, is of a certain weight. So the distance sets where most of that particulate matter will drop out before it reaches past that distance.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, if I'm inside that line, is it not safe from what you just said?
I believe that it's still protective, but it is determined that it would be at its maximum protection to have you outside of that property line or that receptor distance.
I'd like to ask you some questions about an email exchange from papers I received from a public information request. On Tuesday, January the 17th, Sabrina Cody Miller from TCEQ emailed Mr. Strom asking for stack tests. He states in his reply, dated Monday, January 23rd, we cannot technically have an actual stack test on the products on combustion given the facility has not yet been built. He then writes, before submittal of our application and PBR request, we had an in-person meeting with Sam Short on November 10, 2016. It was really a great meeting, and we sincerely appreciated TCEQ taking time to discuss and confirm SMT's appropriateness for PBR. In that meeting, we discussed 30 TAC 106.262, and at that time, Sam thought that would not be needed. Initial indication from that meeting in person with TCEQ, Sam indicated a sand drying facility, PBR, would only take a matter of 1 to 2 weeks. I have several questions concerning this exchange. Without having the full plans in front of you, Mr. Short, how could you give approximate dates and assurances like this?
Based on the information that was provided to me, the description of the process they provided to me, I was able to provide them based on our current production levels of all the permit by rules that we are doing in-house and the amount of time that it typically takes us to process an authorization.
But if all of these sand mines are different, sir, how did you know? If you didn't have a full plan in front of you, how could you be able to say this would pass in that length of time? Wouldn't it have been safer for you to say you needed to look at the plan first?
For permit by rules, there is an established time frame of 45 days for the issue of permit by rule. Again, for a permit by rule, they have to meet all the conditions of the permit by rule. And so if they come in and they meet all of the conditions of that permit by rule and demonstrate that to us, then in typical fashion, we will issue it before 45 days, as low as 24 to 25 days is what our timeframes were running.
Okay, I think he indicated they could be done in 2 weeks. Wouldn't the results from this stat test be needed to be provided for a correct and accurate emissions factor on these stat tests that were asked?
We do allow individuals to use similar equipment to demonstrate that they'll meet, and the reason behind the stack test was to ensure that there were no additional particulates that will come out of the dryers as the sand is being dried. The stack test demonstrates, and the samples that they were required to take demonstrates that the sand is of the size and weight that it would not come out of the stacks. The reason for that is because the rule that authorizes the dryer indicates that only products of combustion can come from that dryer. So if they have any emissions outside of products of combustion, the actual running of the dryer, those are not authorized.
Okay, well, his answer in the email was they cannot technically have an actual stat test for you on the products on combustion because the facility had not yet been built.
Correct.
So how could those emissions been added in if it hadn't even been built yet? And was there a deficiency letter sent out on that because you asked them for something and they didn't apply and give it to you?
For permit by rules, the deficiency process is done via email, and so what you saw, that is the deficiency email. After that email was sent, we did have further conversations with the applicant about the need and the ways to demonstrate the stack test. We do have what we call greenfield sites come in that do not have stack tests, but they have similar equipment, and they use that plus other information to demonstrate they'll meet the conditions of the rule.
Next, I'd like to address the use or non-use of chemicals. And since there is a mention of chemicals and correspondences between TCEQ and SMT, I feel this is within the bounds in this meeting to bring up. Because chemicals can put off emissions into the air, which can result in air pollution and also groundwater contamination. On SMT's plan, they submitted an Appendix B. It mentions clarifier tank twice, a clarifier pump, 2 clarifier flock pumps, and a clarifier underflow pump. To me, this looks like a diagram for adding chemicals. I'd like to know why, if all this is listed in their plan, why wasn't the list of chemicals required as well?
So we did ask if they would be using any chemicals or flocculants. We were told at this time they would not be using any chemicals or flocculants. If they choose to use so, they're not authorized to do it. They'd have to come in, provide those lists of chemicals to us, and they would also have to provide a material safety data sheet of those chemicals for us to evaluate whether they would result in any air emissions for the air authorization.
I'd like to point out that the chemicals I'm questioning are not limited to the flocculants and clarifiers mentioned above. In the plan, it also states that dust suppressants can be used in lieu of water as well. An MSDS sheet for this should have been required as well. Majority of their equipment will be using water, and being a homeowner out here for 20 years, I can assure you that their machinery will need to be cleaned periodically to remove the scale and deposits to avoid buildup. No mention of upkeep or cleaning of these chemicals needed for this cleaning is included in this plan. How come?
You're speaking to maintenance, startup, and shutdown. And maintenance, startup, and shutdown can be authorized through another mechanism, through another permit by rule that does not require registration.
So why, if they're going to use chemicals over top of our recharge zone, why aren't they required to give you a list of those prior to getting any of this? This is totally boundary.
Again, we asked, and the permit authorization we issued says in the authorization you are not authorized to use any chemicals. And until we have that information and they provide an update to that authorization, they are not authorized to use any chemicals for the airplane.
I'd also
Ms.
like,
Hardy, I'd like to give some other folks an opportunity to ask some questions, if you don't mind. Mr. Wilson?
Okay, looking at the TCEQ regulations for wet sand mines and bulk sand handling facilities, it appears that the last time that these were amended or recodified was back in 1997, and there were some and in 2000, there were some administrative changes that were made in the regulations that are in place right now. The regulations have been in place for decades. We're in a position now where we have an evolving industry that changes very rapidly on how they process, how they, what chemicals they use, etc. Why and what means can we do to change the regulations to get it up to standard with the industry that has evolved so quickly?
Because they are rule-based requirements, one option is to submit a petition for rulemaking. The reason why I pause is because I'm trying to think if we have ever had a petition for rulemaking on a PBR. It certainly is possible, and there's a process that we follow when we get a petition. It has to get to the commission within a certain amount of time. They direct us whether to initiate the rulemaking package. But because they are rule-based, that would be the mechanism by which to do it.
Okay, so if we submit a petition to change some regulations, who polices and who makes the decision what gets changed and what doesn't, and what's the process and who's the decision maker?
If for any petition of rulemaking that gets submitted, by procedural rule, the executive director staff has 60 days to get that petition before the commissioners. And the executive director staff will make a recommendation whether to initiate rulemaking or not initiate rulemaking based on a review of the petition. And ultimately, it's the commissioner's decision whether to instruct staff to go forward with a rulemaking package. But it's ultimately the commissioner's decision.
So the executive director of the commission makes the decision, and he determines who or what is worthy of becoming a regulation?
Well, let me make sure that make sure that we're on the same page with regard to the steps. So we get a petition, the executive director gets that before the commissioners and makes a recommendation to the commissioners. The commissioners will decide, based on the petition and the information that's in the petition, whether to instruct the ED to go forward with the rulemaking. And usually that decision, they offer some guidance to the executive director on where they want staff to go in developing the rulemaking package. And then staff will develop the rulemaking based on the petition and any guidance that we receive from the commissioners. That draft package will go to notice for the public to comment on the package that has been developed. That comment will be received, will be taken, it will be evaluated. If there are any changes that are going to be made to the rulemaking package, it will be made, and then it will go back to notice for adoption. And ultimately, the final package would get in front of the commissioners for their approval. And after it's published in the Texas Register, it will become a final rule. So that's the long process.
Right, and we have 3 commissioners that are appointed by the governor.
Okay. All right. I guess you guys are aware that OSHA has made their requirements for PPE and silicate dust exposure more stringent here recently in the last few years. OSHA regulates what happens on a job site within the confines of the facility. If OSHA is making the requirements more difficult and more stringent to protect workers, is the TCEQ going to do something to make the requirements more stringent to protect neighbors of these types of facilities?
That's a good question. So under the Clean Air Act, both the federal and the state Clean Air Act, what the health effect review is focused on are effects outside of the property line, because the concern is the effect on the ambient air, and ambient air is defined as that portion of the atmosphere that the general public has access to. So we're looking for our health effects review at receptors that would be outside of the property line. And so OSHA sets, and I'm not very familiar with their OSHA regulations, but they certainly set the workplace standards. We're looking at the ambient effects like I said, the contribution of those emissions to the atmosphere. So we're not looking at the same, our reviews are different.
So, you know, y'all's permissible exposure levels are different than OSHA's permissible exposure levels.
That may be true. I mean, we're not, OSHA is a federal agency. We're a state agency, not under the purview of OSHA, but go ahead, Tiffany. Introduce yourself.
I'm Tiffany Redfelt. I'm a toxicologist at TCEQ. And so one thing, I'm going to redirect the question a little bit because I think your concerns about crystalline silica.
Correct.
And when I looked into what kind of sands in this area, what kind of exposure might people have to crystalline silica, I found from rulemakers and the individuals that actually worked on the initial assessments that this area doesn't have a lot of crystalline silica in the sand itself. It's unique potentially to certain mines, but in this case, one, the crystalline silica is a low percentage. I can't quote you that exact percentage, but I'm sure we could do some research if that's information you'd like me to look up. Secondarily, the issue at hand, and it's kind of permeated this discussion when Sam was talking, is that the particulate matter produced on size, which is unique for this type of frac sand, is large. And so a big thing that I began to think about as I asked myself, okay, am I concerned? Why would I be concerned? Is because the particulate matter that was investigated and allowed under the PBR is larger than what you can inhale. So you're not going to get exposed to crystalline silica at a high percentage from this particular source. And the size of the crystalline silica, or sand rather, on site produces particulate matter that is large enough that it can't actually enter into your respiratory tract, and it would settle out on site relatively quickly.
And I think I think the word revoke probably wouldn't fit. What would happen typically is a facility operating under a permit by rule, we'd go out and conduct an investigation and find that they don't meet the operating parameters of that permit by rule, in which point a violation, notice of violation or notice of enforcement would be issued. They would come in and get the correct permit if they could. Can I give you an example right off the top of my head? I can't, but that would be the process. Is an investigator would go out there, find that they're mining more material per hour than the permit by rule allows, and say, okay, you have to come in for this different type of permit, or modify your operation to meet the PBR.
Their meetings that the people within 30 miles radius of the plant were going to be at risk of silica sand lung poisoning as a result of the frac sand plant. Is that true?
Will the emissions from this facility travel up to 30 miles?
The expectations is they will not travel up to 30 miles, no.
I mean,
What are your expectations?
they won't
I mean,
travel.
the man in Alana Heights is right behind me.
That they won't travel beyond the property line, or?
Okay, I get the same sand he does. And I'm off Shooter Road, across the way. So you can't say expectations, you say they will. So if people are breathing all of this, this has to be some sort of medical condition. And it's called, and for heaven's sakes, help me out.
Silicosis.
Thank you. And that is a very, very real disease. It's not fake, it's real. And y'all really need to be thinking about it, because sooner or later, all these people here are going to stand up against you and say, stop. And it's not going to be some rule that y'all have made up. It's real. I don't want to come back and hear someone say some regulation if you stop the regulation. Well, folks, you don't need to stop the regulation, you stop the process. Quit before people get sick. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
Thank y'all for being here, and thank you for hearing us out, because I think we all have some real serious concerns. In fact, my grandchildren, we're babysitting because my daughter's out of town, so we had to bring 2 of the grandchildren with us. So I have 3 generations, living generations, here in this area that we're talking about. And we have the Galvan Creek coming through our property, just as neighbor Clarence Kahn brought up a while ago. And this orange stuff that's coming down that creek, supposedly 500-year flood events, it came at least 4 times in the past 12 months. At least 4 times. So I guess we've had 4, major flood events. But, and what's sad about that, because he mentioned another sand company where it's originated from. But the thing is that plant is on the other side of Preferred Sand's proposed mining operation. That material is coming through their property before it gets down to us. So if they can't contain it up there, how is Preferred going to contain it on their 2,000 plus acres? Because it's all in that same drainage system. So they're going to have to contend with it, and then they've got to contend with their own, before it goes across the county road into the next property, correct?
I mean, with respect to the stormwater runoff?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything in the stormwater general permit that talks about proximity to other locations that also have a stormwater permit? I mean,
the stormwater, the permits are, every entity that's authorized under a general permit is supposed to have their own best management practices, or structural controls, or berms, dams, whatever they need to protect from runoff contaminating, with pollutants contaminating the water body. But, every entity is supposed to do that. I don't think you're supposed to stop somebody else's contamination.
It's going to be really difficult for these people to contain stormwater. When that creek comes right through the middle of their property, and until some of us brought it out with the flood, FEMA flood plan, and a lot of pictures, it wasn't until then that they realized that where they're putting the plant was in the flood zone, right next to the Galvan Creek. So how do you protect that? It's impossible. You can't protect it. And this is surface water, and that does fall under your jurisdiction. We're talking to Evergreen. Evergreen represents our protection for the underground water. But this surface water becomes underground water until it gets out of that recharge zone. So if allowed time, it does become recharged water. But anyway, so much for that. As was mentioned, there are several existing sand plants in the area that are proposing, or at least seriously considering, getting into the frac sand production. And it's pretty obvious that they're a step ahead of your organization and any other organization in Austin. And that's sad, but you can't blame them. That's business. But we as responsible people, and you as a responsible organization, are looked to protect us, protect everybody else, protect my grandkids. To me, it don't matter. I'm old enough, it's not going to affect me too much, but you've got to look out for everybody in the state of Texas, because this is affecting everybody. And we think you should set the precedent for the other organizations that can indeed do something to protect our environment. That's not a question, I guess, but let me ask about when you have breaches in these operations and it comes to your office. talking about this area. You mentioned that if it's repeated, then it's escalated and it finally can go to the Attorney General's office. Have you ever taken one to the Attorney General's office?
So there's a whole violation process. And depending upon the severity of the violation, it can be classified as just as an NOV, where it's like, hey, this happened, fix it. It can be an NOE, which, hey, this happened, fix it, and here's your monetary penalty. There's a scale of violations. So getting to the Attorney General's office, you go through that. You go through the scale, and usually the AG is reserved for recalcitrant type folks where they're just not doing it, not getting it. Have we gone to the AG's office? Absolutely. Just our office, for whatever reason, we've had a string of them. I had an investigator that was at a hearing 2 weeks ago. George and I are dealing with one. We'll be meeting with the AG tomorrow. Not sand mining, but other issues in our region.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good. One other thing is these receptors that we've heard from. As these permits are modified, amended, whatever, to take into consideration the use of chemicals or larger quantities, volumes of material, what happens to these areas that include these receptors? Are they simply broadened so you then have more receptors? And what's the recourse for these receptors? Are you going to buy them out if it becomes dangerous for them to live in proximity to these mines?
So when we say receptor, what we're stating is the closest structure that's not owned or operated solely by the company. And so as facilities expand and they come in and have to be reevaluated, they have to meet the rule at the time, if it's for a permit by rule, and the receptor distances and things at that time. If there are other receptors in the area, they have to demonstrate that they are within the distance requirements for those receptors. No matter where they choose to place the facilities, they would have to re-demonstrate that they meet those requirements.
But again, what recourse do these receptors have that, besides complaining and maybe not getting any recourse?
So it's going to depend, again, as we mentioned earlier, for the air permitting side, it's based on the level of emissions. So for permit by rules, they aren't subject to public participation requirements or public notice, and that's, again, tied to determination that they will not make a significant contribution to the ambient air. If a facility were to come in with a larger application, facilities that will emit more and they will no longer meet the permit by rule, generally the next step is a case-by-case new source review permit, and that is subject to public participation. So as Booker mentioned earlier, there's 2 public notices for that, and so we take public comment. And the public also has an opportunity to request a contested case hearing to contest the application.
But what effect will that have if you have members of the public in the area, immediate area, come to your hearing and complain? What do they get out of it? Do you as a result of that, do you not allow the permittee to make the changes that they're asking for?
Well, whether it will be allowed is based on an evaluation, and Sam can talk a little bit more about this, but an evaluation of whether the changes would be protective of public health and the environment.
I think it would depend on.
If it was indeed determined to be an endangerment, then you would not approve the amendment or the permit, correct?
Correct. So if they were to escalate to a larger permit that required public notice, it would also require them to conduct different modeling of the air emissions to demonstrate that those receptors would not be negatively impacted. And if they were negatively impacted, they would have to, we would be in communications with them of either changing their operations or other methods for ensuring that that was not the case.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Well, excuse me, I'm not a public speaker, but I'll give it a shot. And my main concern is, one of my main concerns is the aquifer, the recharge zone. Now, from what I understand, y'all do not have any other companies in the recharge zone, is that correct?
Any other,
It's sand frac man is companies.
do you guys have that information?
I don't have that information.
I think that's something that they'd have to do some research back at the agency.
Okay, and then what really concerns me is all we're getting here basically is a complaint after the fact. And is that correct? Now then, with this recharge zone, once it's contaminated, do you know of any other way to uncontaminate it? I don't know of anything. So from what I always heard and grew up with, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. So y'all have anything special over the recharge zone that's not included in some other places that's not over the recharge zone?
I think when they discussed it earlier, I heard staff say that there are no specific rules or requirements with respect to recharge zones other than the Edwards Aquifer.
Well, you know, I think given, and I'm not a wastewater permit engineer, but you know, given the types of chemicals they might be using or might be in the wastewater, you would have, would dictate whether or not there were liners in a wastewater pond. If they're managing any type of hazardous waste, depending upon the types, there would be secondary containment and requirements such as that. So, you know, I don't know if any of the in the RECRO or the IH or the wastewater permit rules, if there's any specific to, if you're over an aquifer, do A. I just can't, I can't speak to that. But I know that given each type of media, air, water, and waste, there are protections or things that are meant to be protected in place.
Drilling and the fracking is going on, it's the water. And being in my area, the wind blows my direction from all of these plants. I have two now within a mile of me that are silica mines. That's what they are now. One of them, Osborne, just got sold to Emerge, and they plan to hydro mine, which means using a lot of water. I don't know about you guys, we have drought down here, and that's a lot of water, and they plan to double their size in 1 year. That is in the Houston Chronicle, by the way. And you said preferred sands has particulates so large that they aren't a danger. What about the other 5 plants that are already permitted? They are silica plants. Okay, they say it on their sign now, and they're going to change it to frac. Are their particulates dangerous? The size of them? Can you tell me?
So, you know, the purpose of tonight's meeting was to discuss the sand mining authorization. I will ask whether staff had an opportunity to review any of the other sites and look at the types of emissions that were coming out of those facilities.
We have not reviewed the other sites. Those sites would require air authorizations. They would require to submit applications, similar processes. They would have to have an authorization. We can review those sites and what authorization mechanisms they have in place.
So you don't know the size of their silica?
At this time, I can't speak to those sites.
Okay, we don't know if they're large or small. My other question is, well, we're up to 6 now. How many more facilities will you permit in this area? Let's just give it a 20-mile radius. Is there a limit? What's the limit?
Okay. Can you speculate, and would there be a limit of the number of facilities that could be authorized under PBR within a certain distance?
I can't speculate to how many would come into an area. And each facility would be required to submit an application for authorization. And I don't know of any limit per se, other than the limits that are established in the rule.
Okay, so we're over the recharge zone, no limit. Just bring them on.
The limits
As long
that
as
are,
they pass your permitting rule, as many as can come in here can come in. Is that what you're saying?
As long as they can meet the permit by rule, they can obtain authorization to mine sand.
Okay,
right,
thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Crystal Hennigan?
Hi, my name is Crystal, and I live in Bear County right now. And they say a lot of times history repeats itself. Well, we moved to right next to an open pit mine in Bear County in 2013. And there was so much dust in the ambient air that it pushed into our home. Silica was found in our home, and limestone was found in our home. My son developed 12 to 14 mucus plugs in his lungs because of the number of violations that were going on undetected at this plant. So, more importantly, because of TCEQ inaction, this plant could impact the quality of lives for families not only around here, but for Bear County. There have been studies up in Wisconsin that they were able to characterize silica sand from the mine that it came from, and it blew almost 100 miles away. San Antonio and the New Braunfels MSA has the highest rate of childhood asthma in the state. And particulates like silica and coarse particulates like limestone aren't going to help that problem. My son developed reactive airway disease. And as a mom, I fear that he could be dealing with this problem for the rest of his life. Because 4 years later, he still has mucus plugs in his lungs after we moved away. So, I just want my story to serve as a warning and to beg TCEQ to do something. There are children's lives at stake here. And please, please, please do the right thing. If you find them in violation, don't negotiate it behind closed doors like you did with my son and my story. Do not. I'm almost done, sorry.
Did you have any questions?
Yes, I do.
With respect,
I do have
okay.
some questions. So, with your history of allowing ongoing violations at this one plant that's right by your TCEQ Region 13 headquarters, they had 150 years of violations going on at this plant, including hazardous waste. They didn't even know what chemicals, if they were hazardous, they weren't labeled or being stored on site to even protect the workers. So let's not let history repeat itself. With your history of allowing these violations at other mines and berms to break, both in Bear County and apparently down here, and the fact that regulations are designed to protect public health, how often and thorough will your on-site inspections be at Sand Mining of Texas mines so that you can live up to your core mission to protect Texans and our children's health?
So I think Joel talked about our inspection schedule earlier, but I'll go ahead and let him circle back on that.
Right, this facility will be operating under with an aggregate production operation registration, and it'll be inspected, it'll be on the books to be inspected every 3 years. And then as stated earlier, we do ensure 100% of our complaints are investigated. So anytime that we get a complaint on a facility, we'll ensure that it's investigated.
There had been complaints at this facility before, and yet 150 years worth of violations were uncovered. How come you did not catch that, and how can we be assured that that is not going to happen here?
So I guess going to the other facility, that other facility I think was inspected at a more they were inspected. Were they a Title V facility? I don't recall. off the top of my head. But, you know, we investigate 100% of the complaints that we receive. I know in that particular instance, we investigated air complaints and stormwater complaints, and we did site violations and worked with the facility to get some controls in place. And I think that we've had some pretty good success in getting the issue solved.
If there's a chemical spill at this frac sand plant, will you make the community clean it up on their own?
There are rules and regulations pertaining to spills, and they'll have to, depending upon the amount of material that's spilled, have to notify us under the reporting requirements, and then obviously abate the spills that are at the facility.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Selman.
For Not Just Dust. We've had several citizens here concerned with the chemicals that are, we believe, likely to be used in the operation of this plant. I'm going to read some provisions here for context of my questioning. To qualify for a permit by rule, the following general requirements must be met. No person shall circumvent by artificial limitations the requirements of section 116.110 of this title. Now, in connection with TAC 106.4b circumvention check, no person shall circumvent by artificial limitations the requirements of section 116.110 of this title, covering permitting. Circumvention by artificial limitations may include, but is not limited to, dividing a complete project into separate segments to circumvent 106A1 limits, or 3, claiming a limited chemical list in order to begin constructing facilities before a permit or permit amendment is approved for additional chemicals, particularly when the unit will not be economically viable until the additional chemicals are authorized. Mr. Fox brought up earlier the fact that there have been public representations made that Sand Mining of Texas intends to use chemicals in connection with their operations here in Atascosa County. Additionally, there is a flock sensor on the process diagram of their application. I want to know, would that be enough information to kick off an investigation by the TCEQ into whether or not Sand Mining of Texas is circumventing the requirements of the permit by rule process? And twofold, are you aware of any circumstances in which the TCEQ has enforced against an applicant for the circumvention of the application process?
Well, I think, as I've heard staff mention tonight, they're not authorized to use chemicals at this time. With respect to the circumvention rules, what are the typical, I guess, instances where the TCEQ has found or would determine that they are circumventing? I mean, is it enough just to have public statements from an applicant saying, we're going to do this, even though in their application they told us they don't intend to? I mean, what would that look like?
So for circumvention evaluation, when someone comes in for another authorization, we evaluate the circumvention condition to determine whether it should have been one project. It should have been evaluated at that time. So that is one of the things we do evaluate when someone comes back in for an authorization within a time frame, a very close time frame from receiving an authorization. We evaluate the circumvention condition in 106.
Okay, and I asked this question based on the interests expressed tonight in being proactive as possible to prevent the contamination and pollution and any negative effects that a plant like this may have on the county and to the health of the citizens. Is it required that the TCEQ wait until an amendment is asked for the use of chemicals in order to investigate circumvention.
I'm not one of the agency's enforcement lawyers. I do authorizations and rulemaking. But what you're asking for is to speculate, you're asking for speculation on how would you develop an enforcement case. And how would you evaluate evidence, and how would you evaluate the credibility and admissibility of that evidence. And there's no possible way for me to speculate on how such an enforcement case would be developed.
Okay, how about this? What about just the investigation of circumvention? I believe earlier affidavits were mentioned as a procedure by which investigations can be kicked off.
So they're not authorized to use chemicals, but if you went out and conducted an investigation and determined that, yes, they're using flocculants, would that be a circumvention case, or would that be something else?
Well, I think the facility would have to be, I mean, like right now, there's nothing, you know, there's nothing for me to investigate other than just, you know, comments that are being made. You know, I think once we, and it's like Booker said, I mean, it would kind of all be speculation, and how would that stand up in the investigation process of, well, they intend to circumvent. I don't think anything's, if it were to be found or to investigate it, to investigate it, I mean, nothing's been circumvented at this point. I mean, that would be it would be, I don't think there's anything for me to look at right now. I mean, are they using chemicals?
No, not currently,
okay.
But this is a more preemptive
Right.
Provision in that these are requirements that come before the construction of the facility. This comes into play with the qualification for a permit by rule. I would imagine that if someone was to be found trying to circumvent the PBR process, that would be possibly means for disqualification for a permit by rule.